Now come to the 10-minute rule motion. Mr. Andrew Dismore.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to introduce a national day to learn about and remember the Holocaust. This year I visited Auschwitz-Birkenau for the first time on a visit sponsored by the Holocaust Education Trust.
We would like to welcome you to Britannia Flight 8 through the 6A to Katowice.
The cold-blooded, methodical processing of fellow human beings was brought home to me, not just by the huge tragic piles of personal belongings, but by the detail. The sheer scale was only revealed at Birkenau, where 1.5 million people died.
Good morning and welcome on this flight to Poland, to Auschwitz this morning. I know for a lot of you, as you got out of your beds at some ridiculously early time today, the concept of going and coming back from Poland must have seemed very strange to you. The whole concept of actually a day visit to Auschwitz may seem very bizarre. Please don't come with any preconceived idea of how you should react. For all of you, we know that today will be a very tiring day, both physically, mentally, and also emotionally. We have built into the day periods of time for reflection.
I usually do not talk about the Holocaust, but...
You grew up in Nazi Germany?
Yeah, I grew up in Nazi Germany, but I also think at some point it has to end. So talking about it from people like me, and...
I've never heard you talk about it.
I never talk about it.
How old were you when you left?
15. It wasn't so bad when I left. I mean, it wasn't pleasant, but it was no Holocaust yet.
When was that?
38. Are we on now?
All of your family left at the same time, or?
Well, let's just stop. Can we stop for a minute? I believe it was 13 members of my family that were killed, so that is obviously something. And many of the people I went to school with, I would say about 40% of those I went to school with, plus my grandmother.
For about 3 years, this relentless traffic of death continued. As late as the summer of 1944, trains from Hungary and the large ghetto in Poland brought hundreds of thousands of Jews to be murdered at Auschwitz.
The aim of this part of the course, the actual visit to Auschwitz, is to add another dimension to your understanding of the Holocaust. Actually being there, experiencing what it is like today, is a memorable experience, one I'm sure will stick with you for the rest of your lives.
It takes time to create a story, a narrative, out of a historical event. Our understanding, not only of the event as a super event, but of the protagonists in that event, has changed enormously over time. Even in terms of the early perceptions of what we call now Holocaust, the Holocaust was taken out of the war. It was an event that almost, I would say, happened in a vacuum. It was not related to history.
These are Nazi concentration camps. In hundreds like them since 1933, the Nazis have imprisoned their enemies. Now these camps are being overrun by the armies of the Allies. For 12 years, the Nazis developed and perfected deliberate, scientific, cold-blooded methods. Methods for smashing and destroying all those who fought against them. Germans who refused to conform, and the hundreds of thousands of Europeans who refused to accept, were taught the Nazi lessons. Among these 35,000 were Poles, Germans, and Russians.
During the war, indeed after the war, for a lot of years after the war, it wasn't that people didn't know the Nazi regime had murdered millions of Jews in Europe. They did in a general kind of way. But the heaps of bodies in the newsreel photographs at that time, the skeletal figures of the survivors in 1945, these were victims of Nazism defined in a kind of ecumenical fashion. The Holocaust was not an it, was not a thing. It was simply a dimension of Nazi murderousness and brutality in general. It was sort of the Jewish subdivision of the crimes of Nazism, not a distinct thing the way we talk about it today.
There are the bodies, and all those guys are dead.
I can't say have an enjoyable day, have a memorable day. I hope you get something worthwhile out of today, and I'm sure you will.
The camp in Auschwitz became the largest extermination center. Jewish people living in all European countries controlled by the Nazi Germany were sort of sentenced to death.
Everything is political. At least for me, everything is political. In the case of the Holocaust, it has been politicized, even I think before people realized there was a Holocaust, or we named it as Holocaust.
General Eisenhower conducts a personal investigation. Any person guilty of maltreating or allowing to be maltreated, any Allied prisoner of war, internee or deportee, will be ruthlessly pursued and brought to punishment.
It's not like the story we know today that the Americans liberated the Jews and liberated the camps. Auschwitz was liberated by the Soviets, not by the British and not by the Americans. Without the Soviets, that war would have never been won. But it was disallowed to even mention the Soviet contribution. And disremembering became part of the political agenda. The alignments changed immediately after the war. You had to carry on with the Germans as the West's allies.
Document 501, P.S.
Look, for instance, at the Nuremberg trials right after the war. What was the purpose of the trial? Which were really very symbolic, in essence. You know, they tried some 24 major criminals, and this was it, and the denazification program was a joke. It brings closure in a very legal framework, and this is how we actually began to relate to the Holocaust, through the courts.
It was not easy at first to set in motion an extensive pogrom against Jews.
Hating communism meant one thing: marginalizing the Holocaust and rebuilding a new Germany.
I closed the office 1954. No judge, no prosecutor wished to hear witnesses. He said to me, Mr. Wiesenthal, look, we are 35 miles from the border. Maybe in a week they are here.
You mean the Russians?
Then will be you and I in Siberia. This was the situation. The only winners from this Cold War was the Nazis.
The State of Israel was proclaimed in a dramatic proclamation by David Ben-Gurion.
After the war, the shock of the images of the camps was everywhere. The birth of Israel benefited, if one may say, from the fact that there had been this horrible tragedy of the Jews of Europe. The sense of, you know, what the Jews have suffered is so horrendous, now we have to do something.
On the same day, only 30 minutes later, Israel was invaded by 6 Arab armies.
As soon as Israel was established, it was founded as a state, Arabs were Nazis.
Were they?
Of course not. But in the public discourse, when Ben-Gurion was talking about Nasser, he was talking about Hitler.
Our war of independence, fought after 6 millions of our people have been exterminated by the Nazis, proved once again that the cause of justice, faithfully pursued, must triumph in the end.
In the 60s, we were having a very interesting development. Was, of course, the capture of Eichmann and the Eichmann trial.
Reviving memories of the Nazi horrors of the Second World War.
Few of us realized at the time already, although it was all in the open, but emotionally, I suppose, we were unprepared to connect with the fact that this was really a political trial.
Entering the bulletproof prisoner's box is the man charged with the annihilation of millions of Jews in Nazi death camps.
Because for the first 15 years, the Holocaust was totally repressed in Israel. In fact, my generation growing up in Israel, we didn't know anything about the Holocaust. The people who had numbers on their arms always wore long sleeves, so the first thing they did was to have an operation to have it removed. There was a sense of shame of this past. And when Eichmann came on stage, and I purposely use this metaphor because it was a stage performance, very carefully orchestrated by Ben-Gurion and the state, not only Israel became aware of the Holocaust, but the world became aware of the Holocaust.
The Jewish people and crimes against humanity.
Accused together with others during the period 1939 to 1945, caused the killing of millions of Jews in his capacity as the person responsible for the execution of the Nazi plan for the physical extermination of the Jews, known as the final solution of the Jewish problem.
It was the first time that the Holocaust got represented as a kind of hard-edged object in its own right. It served to put what we now call the Holocaust on the agenda.
The agenda was not moral, to teach the world that there was evil in the world. This even, you know, Germans knew that there is evil in the world. Now wait, you have to compensate. And how does one compensate? Compensation, at least for Ben-Gurion, and he often said it, over and above being material compensation, was also the recognition, this was the subtext really of what the world had owed to the Jews, to recognize that we are morally superior as victims. And this is precisely what the culture of victimhood in present day, not only America, but I hope it doesn't reach Western Europe, but Israel has it already too, comes from. victims are morally superior.
The 90s are the period of the greatest expansion of the awareness of this, what we call the Holocaust, the extermination of the Jews of Europe.
For more than any other event, the Holocaust gave rise to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the charter of our common humanity. And it contributed, indeed made certain, the long overdue creation of the nation of Israel. Now, with the demise of communism and the rise of democracy out of the ashes of former communist states, with the end of the Cold War, we must not only rejoice in so much that is good in the world, but recognize that not all in this new world is good. We dedicate the United States Holocaust Museum and so bind one of the darkest lessons in history to the hopeful soul of America.
After the demise of communism, which was the evil empire, Western liberal society, which was now victorious all through, needs, like every society that wants to affirm its own values, needs to emphasize the radical opposite of its own self-image. And what could be a more radical opposite, a more evil system really, than Nazi Germany? People are vaguely aware of it, so you bring it to awareness, and it is really the total opposite. Everybody remembers the great sacrifices to beat the Nazis and so on, and the most horrific center of it is obviously the extermination of the Jews. So I think that it has something to do with no other opposite image at this stage.
One of my criticisms of the focus on Holocaust memory in the United States, and this is very unlike Holocaust memory in Germany, is that it's cost-free for Americans. There is this enormous and very well done Holocaust Museum in Washington. There's no museum of slavery. What would we think of the Germans if they said, well, of course, the Holocaust was really a terrible, terrible thing, but what's really important is that in Berlin we build a monument to American black slavery. I mean, this would be grotesque.
We have learned some lessons, minor lessons perhaps, that we are all responsible, and indifference is a sin and a punishment.
It is frequently said the Holocaust can sensitize us to incidents of oppression and mass murder abroad, and I don't doubt that for many people it does. But by setting this very high standard, it can as easily desensitize us, because compared to the Holocaust, all kinds of other stuff looks not so bad.
I remember this small epiphany I had when President Clinton and Elie Wiesel were dedicating the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and Elie Wiesel turned to Clinton in the middle of his speech.
And Mr. President, I cannot not tell you something. I have been in the former Yugoslavia last fall. I cannot sleep since of what I have seen. Something, as a Jew I am saying that, we must do something to stop the bloodshed in that country.
And the camera then panned to President Clinton, who clenched his jaw and whose eyes glistened. And then I heard these terrible words. He did not say them, but I heard them. He said, but Elie, I am doing something about the genocide in Bosnia-Herzegovina. I'm here with you, remembering the Holocaust. And there's the suspicion that all this memory work is actually a substitute for acting.
In the debate on Bosnia, there were seriously conversations. Is what's going on truly holocaustal or merely genocidal? Is it truly genocidal or merely atrocious? Which is a truly disgusting and not merely unpleasant way of talking about, but something that you are led to when you make the Holocaust the touchstone.
we feel as if we are doing something by raising, as they say, Holocaust consciousness, but not about those who are today disadvantaged and poor and hungry and sick and ill, but about 6 million people who are long dead. This kind of morality I don't buy. It's too cheap. There's something rather strange, one must admit. Usually when we go through a terrible trauma, the natural instinctive way is to forget it, not to keep it alive. If you keep it alive, it begs the question, why?
Some Jews, I underline the word some, now seem almost proud of it, and wear the victimization of Jewry and the Holocaust almost as a badge of honor. This, of course, is related to changes in attitudes toward being a victim.
The whole discussion about pro-choice abortions in the United States is carried out in the lingua franca of the Holocaust. It's a tough competition to beat. You know, American blacks are trying with slavery, but what you have about slavery is folk tales and, Hollywood movies. But you cannot put a slave in front of a camera today to relate his story.
I'm looking for this word.
Have you heard?
Hello.
May I say you should call on the project and shall not tell about you and your family.
You're my kind of people. Bright, sensitive, geniuses. So, it's time to step through the door. You know which one to choose, don't you? Oh, and remember, I like you.
Something had happened in terms of the history of mankind and the human condition that needed to be exposed, learned about, that the perpetrators of which had to be brought before the bar of justice, or civilization could never, in a sense, heal itself. That's the vision, and that's the message, the guiding principle for the Wiesenthal Center.
It's all right for you. You're not Jewish. I am.
Calm down. Even if you're right, Goethe, there are millions of true Germans like me who'll never let this happen. Darling, please don't worry. Please don't worry.
When the deportations began, this young couple committed suicide.
Another chamber, the shower door was closed, and you would have people who would drop pellets.
The issue is whether the facts are right or wrong.
Which facts?
Well, the facts regarding whether or not the Nazi Holocaust has been used as an ideological weapon to bludgeon critics of Israel and later critics of American Jewry into silence. And secondly, whether or not the Nazi Holocaust has in recent years simply become an extortion racket.
Before Evelyn begins, I'd like to wish everybody Gemar Chatima Tova on behalf of the World Jewish Congress and tell you that this is like the B team speaking first.
We have come to a point in which we have established in 52 countries around the world commissions on the Holocaust. This is very much the agenda of the World Jewish Congress today. It is important that the suffering of each victim should be reported and should be in our hearts.
By the way, it's very interesting linguistically, because at first they were called survivors, which is a very neutral term. You can be a survivor of anything, a survivor of an earthquake, a survivor of a car accident. There's nothing unique about the term. Then they were made into martyrs, but not all were martyrs, because at first only those who fought with weapon in hand were martyrs. But then they became holy, kedoshim. This is literally translated holy people. In other words, superior to you and me.
This is the last chance we have. Survivors are dying. I don't want them to die thinking that their words will not be heard.
But then comes Primo Levi, for instance, and tells us very clearly in his books, the best did not survive. Because to survive the camps, you had what he called to live in the gray zone. And the gray zone wasn't a moral zone. You had to steal, you had to push your friend out of line, you had to lie. That's the only way you could survive. And that began a whole new discourse.
I was 14 and a half years old when they took me to the concentration camp.
Which camp?
I was 2 months in Auschwitz, and then they took me to 2 other camps where I was working. One was called Gelsenkirchen, and the other one was somewhere the ammunition factory where I worked.
This is my late father. The picture was taken after the war, and when my father endured the Auschwitz death march, so you could imagine what he looked like at the end.
Did you know that people were being killed all around you?
They told me, but I'm telling you, I was too young to believe it. Sometimes I believed it, and I got very sick and angry, and sometimes I figured, oh no, that cannot be true. And I mean, they weren't criminals. I had 3 younger brothers and 3 younger sisters. And they were children, my parents loved them and they had a good life, so why should they be killed?
I was very close to my parents, but you knew never to ask them what happened to a family member.
I was so shocked still. I didn't believe that. I was sure my father is going to come home. He was 39 years old when they took him. And I just couldn't believe it that I'm the only one who survived it, such a large family.
Everyone was dead on my mother's side and my father's side. We never had any aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents. Everyone was exterminated. My father never said a word about it. To his dying day, literally nothing. I never was able to summon the courage to ask him. My mother never stopped talking about it. There was no topic that did not lead back to the war. Till the last week of her life, she was still denouncing that a handful of Holocaust gangsters and profiteers are going around the world sanctimoniously wrapping themselves in the mantle of needy Holocaust victims and then taking the money for their organizations. For everything she endured, she received $3,500. And there were people who were raking in billions in the name of her suffering.
It's not here. I'm looking for Wyman's book, Abandonment of the Jews.
Well, what do you see your purpose as now?
The same purpose. Our purpose is very simple, to defend and safeguard the rights and interests of the Jewish people throughout the world. And that changes, of course. That is to say, the international Jewish agenda changes with each historic period.
There's been a very strong attack upon yourselves and the whole restitution process by Norman Finkelstein recently. What's your views about it?
Frankly, Mr. Finkelstein's views are warped. And I've told him this after he phoned me, after he wrote his book. He is engaged in what I can only describe as the big lie. And I don't use that term casually. At the heart of his thesis, I think, one of his main arguments is that the effort towards Holocaust restitution is little more than extortion in order to enrich Jewish organizations. I think that's one of his central theses. And he makes the charge in his book that the World Jewish Congress Treasury has amassed $7 billion. As they used to say here, there was a famous manager of the New York Yankees called Casey Stengel. He would always say, you could look it up. Well, you could look it up in his book. And I challenged him on this, because let me begin by saying, it ain't so. Period. Full stop. And he cited as his source a reference in a German newspaper which said this. And he believes he's a scholar.
But it's not that there shouldn't be restitution. That's not what you're saying.
I find that a funny question because there's nobody who fought harder for restitution than I did. I devoted maybe 20 years to fighting for my mother's restitution. What I oppose is not restitution. I oppose, number one, demanding money on false pretexts. What was done to the Swiss bankers was simply extortion. It was a fraud. And number two, once you've gotten the monies, then to deny it to the actual victims, well, that's just shameless.
I think he's raising some very important and legitimate questions. Like how much of the money that various Jewish organizations are collecting around the world, from the Swiss, from the Germans, and everywhere else, really reaches the survivors?
Mr. Finkelstein wants to deny the number of survivors that are alive. And he wants to argue that the Holocaust is an industry, and that those victims that are still alive seeking restitution, that is not restitution, it's extortion, because Jewish organizations are taking the money. But the World Jewish Congress is not taking the money. It's one of those old things where, well, don't bother me with the facts, it doesn't fit into my thesis.
These organizations, that they are self-appointed, and besides this, they claim they are entitled to the airless properties and the airless thing. Who appointed this? This is I mean, I can't even say words that this is.
Some would argue, and it's not something that can be dismissed easily, that this is justice. What was ours belongs to us. But ours is a very, very ambivalent relationship. What do you mean ours? The Holocaust, the victims are mine. I have a right to claim in their name. The State of Israel has a right to claim in their name. The American Jewish Congress has a right to claim in their name. The American government has a right to claim in their name. I don't remember ever seeing, an authorization.
There was, from the beginning, an understanding that, first of all, many families, indeed many communities, were completely wiped out without a trace. Secondly, entire institutions were also wiped out, decimated, so that the notion of, if you will, reparations, not just to individuals but to institutions, is a legitimate one.
Does that mean that you, the Wiesenthal Center, might benefit as well from some of this?
I think we might. I'm not exactly, I would say, I can tell you definitively that we're not exactly at the front of the line.
I am a great believer that a certain portion of assets should be used for purposes of remembrance. And therefore, I accept that position, although I believe that there is a debate in that regard. But I do again want to stress that the World Jewish Congress, as a political body, does not accept restitution funds. We do not believe it should be given to Jewish organizations, and as far as we have been concerned, it is not.
like that plate we saw up there, this is a new monument, memorial for Roma and Sinti people. So you can see that in English the term Holocaust is used, in German not Holocaust but Völkermord. So this was mentioned already in the GDR time, but like Elie Wiesel and others who came here from Auschwitz in the very end, were not mentioned in that perspective. So therefore, another monument for all the Jewish victims was erected. Their bodies were mostly burned to ashes in that crematorium, and it became visible for the prisoners that their way out of the camp should go through the chimney.
From Norway in the north to Greece in the south, thousands of concentration camps spread across Europe. Helmno, Sobibor, Belzec, Treblinka, Majdanek, and Auschwitz-Birkenau.
What was the role of the Jews in Europe for 2,000 years? They are the group that's both inside and outside of European culture. They're not Christian, but they're clearly Europeans in the sense of living there and acquiring its science, its languages, its values. Insiders, outsiders, killing people who are making ritual victims. We haven't all figured that out, and Joseph Campbell died before he could get to the Holocaust. You know, it's one of his archetypal myths, and Jung died before he could make it one. But it would repay analysis in that sense.
Yes, one of the interesting examples of the way there's something for everybody in Holocaust discourse is the uses of this famous quotation from Martin Niemöller.
A non-Jew, a pastor, who was also one of Hitler's victims. And he wrote...
Niemöller's dictum was right when he said first they came for the Jews.
Time magazine, Vice President Al Gore, and a speaker at the 1992 Republican Convention follow the example of the Encyclopedia of the Holocaust in moving Jews from last to first place.
First, they came for the Jews.
And I didn't protest.
And I didn't speak out.
Because I wasn't a Jew.
Because I wasn't a Jew.
The U.S. Holocaust Museum preserves the list and order intact, except for prudently omitting communists.
Then they came for the communists.
And I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist.
Because I didn't protest. I wasn't a communist.
Then they came for the trade unionists.
I didn't protest because I wasn't a trade unionist.
Catholics are also added to the version of the quotation inscribed on the Holocaust Memorial in Boston, which is a heavily Catholic city.
Then they came for me.
And in the end, when they came for me...
And there was no one left to speak for me.
There was nobody there to protest. So I think that's absolutely correct.
Other versions include homosexuals on Niemöller's list. The quotation has been invoked for causes ranging from Jewish settlement on the West Bank to freedom of the insurance industry from government regulation.
In June of 1941, Hitler double-crossed Stalin
and invaded the Soviet Union.
So why is the story told over and over and over again? I mean, memories normally...
I don't want to be cynical, but it's a good story. And I don't mean it in a cynical way. It's a good story because it has all the elements that make into a story. The evil perpetrators.
Death squads, ordinary men.
There is the bad guy. There are the good people, the innocent victims.
At last, the World War and the war against the Jews have become one. Ordinary people waging wars of extermination with extraordinary cruelty and precision. The unthinkable, now mundane.
It's something that fascinates people because it seems larger than life. And there's a so-called a redemptive end for some people, the way they look at it. And that is, let's say, the state of Israel. In other words, we have survived. It has drama in it.
On some of the suitcases you can see dates of births. For example here, Petr Eisler, the date is 20th of March 1942. 2-year-old boy was useless in the camp, he couldn't work in the camp. That's why most probably he was taken to gas chamber and killed together with his mother.
There is something extremely compelling, extremely appealing, alluring in that combination of kitsch where you are full of compassion, of pity for people you don't know, for people that even perhaps as a group you don't particularly like, i.e. the Jews, for people that you really respect, the cultured German, and all of these elements and all of these contradictions are extremely appealing to our psyche.
Wohl hatten die Deutschen viel gesprengt, verbrannt und verbracht.
On the flight this morning, I said the aim of this visit was to give you an added dimension to your understanding of the Holocaust. Before we leave Birkenau today, we will be having a short service of remembrance.
How does one take in? How can one absorb or begin to comprehend what you have seen here today?
Christianity is a religion which has made an emblem of torture and death its central symbol, right? The crucifix. This is rather foreign to Judaism. I think of the way in which the Holocaust Museum in Washington, other museums in other places, become the central symbol of Jewishness that we present to the non-Jewish world. The Holocaust represents this kind of focus on suffering and holy suffering, which saturates Christianity. In that sense, it's a kind of Christianization. If you look at some of the Holocaust museums in which one is invited to follow the steps in the murder process, to me, it resembles nothing so much as the Stations of the Cross on the Via Dolorosa in Jerusalem. The kind of fetishism of objects from the Holocaust, the cast iron door of a crematorium oven, an SS guard's whip, the shoes of victims. This, to me, looks like the kind of pieces of the true cross and shin bones of saints.
I want the 6 million to lay in rest wherever they are. I don't go visit them in the camps. No, to me it is not a place to perform religious or any other kind of ritual. I want a better future for this world. And I don't think that contemplating a better future is by constantly referring to the epitome of evil.
Say, learn the lessons of the Holocaust. That phrase gets to me. The lessons of the Holocaust. Don't elect Hitler. Don't murder 6 million Jews. I mean, these are pretty banal lessons.
This is a victory celebration. This is the Israeli Air Force showing off a bit at an air show after the war. These pilots and planes are part of what most airmen admit is the best tactical air force in the world.
Do Jews extrapolate lessons from the Holocaust that apply to the modern state of Israel? Absolutely, yes.
What are those lessons?
Which is that Jews need to defend themselves. Jews cannot just rely on people from the outside who will say, trust us, rely on us, etc.
When Israel was at its most powerful, it was wrapped in the mantle of a victim, namely the Holocaust.
Mr. Finkelstein is arguing that the Holocaust and the lessons of the Holocaust have informed American and other foreign policy. I think that's true. And that brings us back to the original contention. There are universal lessons of morality, of ethical behavior, and of politics that must be drawn from the Holocaust.
I'm Jewish, and my own personal attitudes were no doubt shaped in part by the Holocaust and by the members of my family.
Whenever leaders went to Israel, you were always taken, first of all, to Yad Vashem.
Yes.
And what was the purpose of doing that?
Well, the purpose was to appeal to the sense of responsibility of the leaders, pointing out to them that something like that happened once before might therefore happen again.
Usually it's the first thing they do when they get off the plane. They meet whoever is their host, whether it's the president, the prime minister, or whatever minister, and then the next morning they're taken to Yad Vashem. They're photographed next to Elie Wiesel, you know, on banks of Buchenwald. They lay a wreath, they put a yarmulke on. They come out, they write a few words in the guest's book of the worst atrocity in the world, you know, the human race has never gone lower, this should never happen again. And he goes to the next cocktail. That's what happens. But it works on people emotionally.
What effect does it have? Or is it supposed to have?
Guilt, number one. Guilt because the truth of the matter is that the world really abandoned the Jews during the 30s and 40s.
So do you think that the state of Israel was, in a sense, recompense for the Holocaust?
Well, yes, but I must say President Assad of Syria once said to me, why should we pay for the crimes committed in another continent by a different religion?
And of course with the Intifada and the suppression of the Intifada, the analogy with the Holocaust turns from being something that was used in support of Israel to something that was used in criticism of Israel.
Which means that as a victim, I have a little permission, even if unstated, to become a victimizer if anybody not only threatens me, if I think he may threaten me. We all do try to use our stronger points to further our aims. Every one of us. Sometimes it's your look, sometimes it's your brains, and sometimes it's your suffering. And if it works, if selling that part of you, of your experience, works, and you gain by it, you do it. We're talking now only about politics. We wouldn't dare talk about morality. Is it moral? That's a whole different question.
Do you think there are lessons of history?
I think it's only laboratory. There are important lessons of history. Only people who don't know history pretend that you can do everything as if nothing had ever happened before.
Did we do it in 20 minutes?
Yeah, I don't know how much time.
I mean,
how are you going to use me?
Huh?
With whom?
Sandra Dismore.
Holocaust Remembrance Day, Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 23rd of July.
Friday the 23rd of July. Order.
To battle further with perceptions of the Holocaust, visit our website at channel4.com/next step.